Hello, welcome back, and today I'm going to be reading a quote from this book right here, Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. Now, everyone that I have talked to that has read this book highly recommends it, and I do too. I think it's a fantastic book to read. Everything that Jordan Peterson has come out with that I've encountered, such as his podcasts, his lecture series, particularly on Genesis, it all seems to be of quality work, and it was never a waste of my time to look at it. Now, when he's covering things, especially from a biblical perspective, he's looking at it from a humanities perspective, particularly psychology. So I do want to put that little asterisk there, but it is a very interesting and worthwhile perspective for us to look at. Now, about the book itself, the tagline is an antidote to chaos. I believe that this rings really true for this book because the chaos that is described in this book, when you're too far out into chaos, is described as this thing of nihilism, self-gratification, the easy way out, all of these things that we've actually talked a little bit on this series before, but it really dives deep into some of those ideals that society has now and says, this isn't good for you. So it creates different rules in which, if you follow them, you're going to orient yourself in such a way that you emerge out of that chaos and you bring order to the self. That is what the book is in a nutshell. And let me just read some of the chapters in the beginning of the book just to kind of lay out what he's doing here and what he means. So our quote is actually going to be from the first rule, which is stand up straight with your shoulders back. Rule 2 is treat yourself like someone you are responsible for helping. Rule 3, make friends with people who want the best for you. Rule 4, compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is today. That all being said, when I look at the figure of Jordan Peterson, I actually see someone who is outside of the church that has brought more people inside of the church, which is very cool. This book especially has guided a lot of young people who are lost in that nihilism, who are lost in that materialism, and has really brought them out of it and has built themselves towards what is ultimately good. That good happens to be God for a lot of people, so it's just naturally brought people back to the church, and I find that so fascinating and neat. So, with all of that out of the way, because I wanted to really preface this before I went gone into what we're doing today, I'm going to now read the quote that I have. To stand up straight with your shoulders back is to accept the terrible responsibility of life with eyes wide open. It means deciding to voluntarily transform the chaos of potential into the realities of habitable order. It means adopting the burden of self-conscious vulnerability and accepting the end of the unconscious paradise of childhood, where finitude and morality are only dimly comprehended. It means willingly undertaking the sacrifices necessary to generate a productive and meaningful reality. It means acting to please God in the ancient language. To stand up straight with your shoulders back means building the ark that protects the world from the flood, guiding your people through the desert after they have escaped tyranny, making your way away from the comfortable home and country, and speaking the prophetic word to those who ignore the widows and children. It means shouldering the cross that marks the X, the place where you and being intersect so terribly. It means casting dead, rigid, and too tyrannical order back into the chaos in which it was generated. It means withstanding the ensuing uncertainty and establishing, in consequence, a better, more meaningful, and more productive order. Now, I want to just mention very briefly that the language here, where he's borrowing a lot from the Bible and borrowing a lot of these allegories and metaphors to the Bible here, very beautifully written. I absolutely love it. And I could get lost in this for a very long time. But for the sake of focus, I did write down a couple of things that I wanted to go over. The first, which is the metaphor itself, which is standing upright isn't just a physical reality, but the physical reality in and of itself also has a metaphysical reality attached to it. So that he wrote that somewhere in the first chapter as well, so I don't want to be totally taking from that. That being said, I want to put that in my own words. Confronting reality in and of itself is to assume responsibility, and that we're going to orient ourselves in such a way that we first accept reality and then bring order to it. In order to do that, we have to have an idealized version of what could be. So there's an idea of possibility here. Now that comes hand in hand with freedom. And there is an endless potential of habitable order should we explore all of those inexhaustive possibilities. And that's where freedom is. But that's the neat idea here, is that freedom and duty, what we're responsible for, goes hand in hand. That means that when we finally accept the reality of the cross in what we were talking about last week, there is something for us to do. There is a pathway forward in which the story begins at the cross. It doesn't end at the cross. It doesn't end with death. That's really the point in which Christians believe we can finally move forward into the new life. I think this idea of taking on responsibility, it is something that Jordan Peterson is, of course, talking about here. But this is the idea of what the Christian life is all about. So for the next part, I wrote down a direct quote from what we read earlier: accepting the end of the unconscious paradise of childhood. Now, this is describing what is happening with the world and doing whatever feels good, trying to go for maximal freedom, and trying to ignore what vulnerabilities we have and to ignore whatever responsibilities have, not to serve our freedom, but even at the detriment of it, and even at the detriment of the self. Now, the reason why I'm bringing up this now is because last week I didn't really have a hope for those who follow the way of the world. The reason why I'm saving this up till now is because I didn't talk about what rock bottom looks like. A lot of people who have read this book and a lot of people that I've talked to have experienced rock bottom. It's a real place. It's a low place, but you can even meet God at rock bottom. And that's what I want to get across now. And this is probably what I was most passionate about in reading this and trying to convey to people, that no matter where you're at, even in the worst of circumstances, God can be there. He can forgive your sins, and he can pursue you as long as you pursue him. If you aren't looking at reality for what it is, if you're choosing to ignore it, it's going to be hard to find what reality is. But when you stand up properly and approach being properly, you can begin to look at how you can put a trajectory to your life to make things better for yourself, to put things back in order, and to follow him. That is why I put deny yourself, pick up your cross, and follow him as the last step, because no matter where you're at, you can have that forward trajectory to bring yourself through, to find meaning in the cross, to find meaning in that suffering, and to serve him through that. I think, to me, when I'm looking at our society as it is now, that is the message that they need. And that is the antidote, as it says at the beginning of the book, the antidote to chaos. Because we are totally awash in that. But when we look at accepting the world for what it is and accepting the cross, that is the ultimate antidote to all of the ills. When we're looking at the world not wanting to go that way, there is still hope for this world. There is still hope out there for those who do not follow. Before we close out, I want to give a general word of encouragement. Many of us look at the society that we're living in today and look at it as an insurmountable thing that we're not going to be able to overcome by ourselves. And to a degree, that is true because we aren't lone wolf Christians and we don't do things totally on our own. That being said, I think we're often missing the point when we look so far ahead of us beyond the scope of what we can control. And we can get that paralyzing fear instead of that freedom. Because if we're looking at freedom so wide lens that there's an endless array of possibilities, we don't know how to act in that void. That being said, what if we control what is directly ahead of us? That being said, we can control ourselves because self-control is a fruit of the Spirit. Now, when we have that circle of influence under control, we then move on to our families, and we can directly influence what our families are doing. When we influence what our families are doing, then we can move forward and take on our communities and shape our communities in the way that is in proper order, and so on and so forth. So if we're all going towards that goal where we're shaping our community, shaping our church, shaping our families, and then shaping ourselves, it really starts to take on this image of Christ. That is our hope, right? We might not have that top-down control, and that's okay. I'm comfortable with knowing that I can't just imprint my image of myself on everything that I touch, because that's not my intention with any of this. If I'm going to have a degree of control, I don't want my imprint, but I want his. I want his reflection, Jesus' reflection, in everything that I do, shaping the community, shaping my family, and shaping myself. With that idea in mind, and with the tasks set ahead of us, we must remain steadfast in our endeavors. That being said, I think it's so easy for us to lose that hope sometimes looking at how things are from a societal standpoint. So I also want to address that angle of it. Now, there is a verse in Isaiah that I keep coming back to every couple of weeks over the last year or so, and I'm going to read that for you now. He gives strength to the faint and strengthens the powerless. Youths may become faint and weary, and young men stumble and fall. But those who trust in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not become weary. They will walk and not faint. This verse speaks to me because it seems like the intersection between the endurance of character, our motivation, our responsibility, and his blessed assurance, all combining to help us have that enduring hope that can energize us and move us forward. This builds our hope in order for us to serve in the kingdom of God. I know a lot of other people out there will likely find the same thing that I do here, is that when I'm doing his will and everything is aligned properly, I don't get burned out and I keep wanting to move forward. When we see those small victories line up for us, it helps us to endure, and the hardship that we find, no matter where we're starting from, it's not where we're at. It's a trajectory that pulls us forward and pulls us out of our sin and allows us to glorify his name for what he has done for us when we pick up the cross and follow him. And until next time, God bless and stay salty.